What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to get into my personal expectations and wants for the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2. And remember, these are just my personal wants and expectations. As of the making of this video, we've gotten no confirmation on what exactly we're getting, so keep that in mind. Now, there's one game in particular that I believe is of utmost importance and needs to be on Volume 2 specifically. And if it's not, I'm going to be a little disappointed. And we're going to get into what that game is in just a second. But before we do, as always, I want to say a quick thank you to you guys who have been showing support, whether it's through likes, commenting, or subscribing. All of those things help me out a ton. If you're not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. I make at least one Metal Gear video a week. Now, what is this elusive game that I've been alluding to in the thumbnail and in the intro to this video? Well, if you haven't guessed just yet, it's Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots. And this game is, as I mentioned, of utmost importance because, as most of you know or should know, it is the one of few games that has been kind of relegated and forgotten on the original console that it launched for. So as most of you know, Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots launched in, I believe, 2007 or 2008 on the PlayStation 3 console exclusively. And since then, it has not been re-released, remastered, obviously remade, or even just, released on any sort of modern digital storefront like the PlayStation Store. It's one of very few games that you have to play on the original console that it launched. One of very few mainline games, I should say, if not the only, that you have to play on the original console that it launched on. So that is reason number one why I believe MGS4 absolutely needs to be on Volume 2. Now, why am I so, harped on the fact that it needs to be on Volume 2 specifically and not 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever they decide to do? Well, that's because it just goes to show that Konami is listening to us, the fans, and what we want, and they have their sort of ear to the ground and know what games we want to play and haven't been able to play outside of on their original consoles like MGS4, right? It's actually funny, as a little side note, I tweeted out, as I was capturing footage for this video, I tweeted out one of those little usage warnings. Those of you guys who have played MGS4, you know that you have to install the game to make, loading times bearable and all that. So there's those little kind of like installation screens where Old Snake is smoking a cigarette while the game is installing. And one of the usage warnings, or whatever they call them, is, it states that this game was developed for use exclusively on the PlayStation 3 console or something like that, right? So I was like, oh, that's hilarious. Let me screenshot that and tweet it out just as like a sarcastic, like one-off tweet, right? And it ended up being probably one of my most interacted with tweets of all time. So that just goes to show you that this game is, one, beloved by a lot of people. It's a lot of people's actually first Metal Gear. A lot of my friends, this was the first Metal Gear they played that got them into the series, which is just bonkers to me to think about. But it's an important game, right? It's a numbered, mainline, canonical, Hideo Kojima produced and developed, game. So to have it just stuck on the PS3, just rotting away, where a lot of us don't have PS3s anymore, and the only other way to play if you don't have a PS3 and a copy of MGS4 is less than legal, and that's obviously through the use of an emulator. And on top of it being a little, on the shady side, less than legal, you also need to have the technical know-how and a PC beefy enough to handle a PS3 emulator, right? So it's not very convenient for most people. It would be much more convenient just to release it as part of the Master Collection, right? And make it so we can play it, right? Play through this game that's extremely important. It's a game that, covers the end of Solid Snake's arc, his character arc. We get a lot of backstory on other characters and where they end up and what they end up doing, right? So it's a game that, although it's not my favorite Metal Gear Solid game, it's a very important game that's been relegated to its original console for way too long. People on PC that are exclusively PC gamers haven't been able to experience it. Same with people who have, grown up with Xbox consoles. They haven't been able to experience it. So it just makes sense for them to, sort of find a way to port this game on current gen consoles or platforms. And that isn't to say that it's easy. I'm not one of these people that says it's like, oh, all they have to do is, rip it and run it through an emulator and make the emulator run on PS5 or whatever. This is a game that, one, has a lot of licensed items and weapons in it. All those guns are actual guns with actual names and actual models that I guarantee Konami is not going to want to rent out the licenses for again. So those all have to be tweaked, all the names, and there's a ton of guns in that game, like a lot of guns in that game, right? So they have to tweak all that. There's a lot of Apple licensed products. There's the iPod, most famously, that you can use as Old Snake. There's Otacon's MacBook Pro that he uses as his laptop in the entirety of the game. So that has to be changed, because I guarantee Konami does not want to pay Apple for, the rights to that stuff and being able to use that stuff. So it's not an easy task. It's not an easy ask by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm not going to sit here and act like it is. I wouldn't know where to start with something like that, but it is something that we absolutely need, and something that Konami absolutely needs to put a bunch of their manpower and resources to figuring out. We need this. Like I said, if it's not on volume 2, and, they need to tell us that they're working on it. If they're not going to put it on volume 2, they need to update us and say, hey, we hear you guys. MGS4 is super important. You haven't been able to play it anywhere outside of the PS3, but it's coming. We're working on it. We just can't get it out to you guys in volume 2. So then it'll be on volume 3. I'll be happy with that. That's fine with me. That's absolutely fine if they update us and they tell us, hey, it's in the works. It's really hard to do. We're figuring it out, but it is coming. Hey, hats off to them. They're figuring it out. Like I said, I wouldn't know where to start with it, right? So that's my main point around this video is Metal Gear Solid 4 is a huge, monumentous game that needs to be included in volume 2. And if it's not, then they need to update us and say that it's coming, right? So that's all I'm going to talk about when it comes to MGS4. Now, the other games that I want to see included with this collection, there's one little thing before we move on to what the other games are that I do want to bring to your guys' attention, because it's something that I realized when I was making my last video on the Master Collection Volume 1. If you go to the official site for the Master Collection Volume 1, you'll see that obviously there's the images, the covers for Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3, right? And then to the right of MGS3, there's actually like something that says stay tuned for more information. Now, I took that as stay tuned for the subsequent releases of volume 2, 3, 4, whatever they go up to, right? But I was thinking while making this video that maybe that means that they're going to include something like Metal Gear Solid for the Game Boy Color, or Ghost Babel, whatever it's called where you live, right? There's that spin-off game for the Game Boy Color that released in between Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2, and I think the year 2000. So maybe they're bundling that in as part of the first Master Collection, and then that would follow like order of release. So you're getting Metal Gear 1, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, MGS1, MGS2, MGS3, and then Ghost Babel, or Metal Gear for the Game Boy Color, right? And that would give us a little more insight into how they're planning to release these subsequent volumes of the Master Collection. What that means is Volume 2, if we follow that same logic, would be something like Acid 1, Portable Ops, Acid 2, MGS4, and Peace Walker, right? If we follow that same logic, if they do decide to like throw us a curveball and give us Ghost Babel bundled in with Volume 1 as like the bonus bundle game that you get, that everybody gets, following that same logic, that's what we should be getting, right? So if they don't do that and they're just deciding to release volumes with the mainline series, the canonical series, the Hideo Kojima produced series, right? Then it changes a little bit. Then we should be getting Portable Ops, and we'll get into what I want to see out of Portable Ops in a modern, re-release or port. MGS4 and Peace Walker. That would be my dream Volume 2 if we're excluding spin-offs. And I semi-consider Portable Ops a spin-off, and I semi-don't. And I think Kojima does as well. He's mentioned that before, that part of it is canon, part of it kind of isn't. So it's kind of like this nebulous game that's in between being canon and not. But anyway, touching on Portable Ops, since I already mentioned it, what I want to see is if you've emulated this game before, like I have, full disclosure, I own Portable Ops. I own Portable Ops Plus and the Japanese version of Portable Ops, so I don't feel bad admitting this, but I've ran it through I think the most famous one is the PPSSPP emulator, and it's hilarious that it's called that. That's the most famous PSP emulator, and the one I've used at least. And I've emulated through there. There's a bunch of community speed like hacks and frame rate hacks that you can implement, and control hacks that you can implement. I want to see something like that included if they do re-release Portable Ops in Volume 2. For those of you guys who haven't played Portable Ops, never played it on the PSP, the controls were very wonky. Like if you guys remember, if you've had a PSP or if you've ever played one, it had that weird little analog stick on the bottom left of the console. Then you'd have your D-pad, the face buttons over here, right? And there was no analog stick on the bottom right, like that's included in the PlayStation Vita. It just had that weird little nub, right? So obviously this is a precursor to Peace Walker. And so it doesn't control as nicely as Peace Walker does. They kind of hit their stride in their rhythm for Peace Walker. But anyway, you would move Snake with the little nub, and then you would turn the camera with the face buttons. So it was very strange. But then the face buttons were also used to like fire weapons. It was very strange, very wonky controls. I don't know how any of us got through that game with the original iteration of the controls. But all this to say that if they were to re-release it, that is number one prio of what they need to change. They need to update the controls and make it so it's a bit more of a smoother experience for us. That game kind of plays like in between. It's like an expansion of MGS3, really. That's the best way to put it. And even then, it doesn't play as smoothly as MGS3 does, even with legacy controls in mind. So re-release it, update the controls, get some sort of like speed hack going where it's locked in at the very least 30 frames per second, if not 60. 60 would be nice. And again, that is possible. I've done it through a PSP emulator, and PSP emulators you can run on a toaster. So if I can figure it out and run it on my PC, then they can definitely figure it out. So yeah, updated controls, whatever graphics they can squeeze out of that old game that was made to be played on the PSP, awesome. And then, like I said, a stable frames per second would be really nice. Portable Ops is one of those weird games where I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. I really like some aspects of it. I respect it for being the precursor and kind of like the rough draft for one of my absolute favorite Metal Gear games of all time. And we'll get into that in a second. So I respect it for those reasons. I was really excited for it. I really liked it. You know, the first couple times that I played it, I thought it had some pretty unique ideas and cool ideas, forward-thinking ideas, right? It's a Metal Gear game at heart, and it's one that you guys should definitely play, especially if it's packaged into one of these Master Collection volumes. So that's Portable Ops. The next game that I want to see is Peace Walker. Now, Peace Walker is one of my absolute most beloved Metal Gear games ever, including spin-offs, all the other mainline, canonical, numbered games entries in the series. Peace Walker is probably top 3 for me, personally. I revisit this game all the time. I love revisiting it. I love starting just fresh save files. I think I've had like 7 save files that I've completed from the beginning of the game, and 100% of them unlocked everything. I absolutely love this game for some reason. I don't know what it is. It's one of those comfort or cozy games for me, whatever people call them nowadays, where I can always go back to the game and I enjoy it just like I did the very first time that I played it. Again, I don't know what it is about it. It's very lighthearted. It's very important to the series, obviously, especially considering, you know, having Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain tie into it directly, right? It's not like it's like some silly, like goofy game. It is very goofy in a lot of ways. And there's some goofy side ops and, you know, missions that aren't part of like the main missions. And even some of the main missions are pretty goofy, right? But I absolutely, I don't know what it is, but I love Peace Walker so much. And just thinking about being able to play it again for like the 8th time now and platinuming it again and playing with friends, doing co-ops missions and taking on the bosses. I can just envision that, looking into the future, and envision myself having a blast with you guys on Twitch or on YouTube, wherever I end up streaming. You know, doing some of the hardest missions, doing the Monster Hunter missions, all that. I cannot wait for them to repackage this game again. And I know you've been able to play it on the PSP, obviously, and it was included in the HD collection. You've been able to play it on Xbox, the Legacy collection, right? Digital storefronts. But again, this is one game that I can revisit over and over again. And every time they release it, I'm going to eat it up and buy it again. So don't really need to tweak too much, honestly. Obviously try to get the highest graphical fidelity you can out of it. But other than that, like, it runs really well. It looks okay. And it controls really well, in my opinion. It controls much better than Portable Ops. So absolutely include Peace Walker in this next iteration, in this next volume of the Master Collection, if you can. I already mentioned Acid 1 and 2. If they do release it, awesome. I think I've said this so many times over the years. If you guys have followed me on Twitter, you guys know I say this at least once a year. But I truly believe that Acid 1 and Acid 2 especially would do super well with modern audiences. Those deck building games and card games in general and tactical RPGs like Fire Emblem and stuff like that do super well with people nowadays. Acid and Acid 2 would do extremely well if they were re-released. I guarantee it. I'm willing to put money on it. But I can see them holding off and releasing them with like a separate entry. Maybe Volume 3 would be Acid 1, 2, Rising, and like Survive or something. All the spin-offs or all the big spin-offs. And Ghost Babel included in that if it's not included with Volume 1. But I can see the spin-offs having their own sort of volume, right? But either way, if they include Acid and Acid 2 in Volume 2, or if they wait until later and re-release them as part of another one, I'm happy. I love those games. I'm probably one of very few people that's actually played them all the way through and likes them. But yeah, it's 2 solid games, no pun intended, that I guarantee a lot of people would get into for the first time and go, huh, these games, there's something to them. But that's it for Volume 2, and my opinions and my expectations for it. As the last little sort of disclaimer here, or I guess not really a disclaimer, but just side note, there's a few games that I absolutely do not want to see in Volume 2, and that's Ground Zeroes, The Phantom Pain, and Survive. And I know some of you guys were like wincing and like cringing that I even mentioned Survive, but those 3 games are readily and easily available and accessible on pretty much all modern consoles, last gen and PC. You can play Ground Zeroes, The Phantom Pain, and Survive through Steam. You can play them on your PS4. You can play them on PS5, because as far as I know, you can play most, if not all, PS4 games on the PS5, right? You just pop in the disc and play them. I don't know. I don't have a PS5 yet, so I don't know, but that is what I've heard. So again, if they're going to re-release these games, cool, but do it on like Volume 4 or 5 or whatever the last volume is, right? We absolutely do not need Ground Zeroes, The Phantom Pain, and Survive anytime soon. I think we can all agree on that, right? We'd much rather see some of these older games, older spin-off games that some of you guys have never even played before we see Ground Zeroes, TPP, and Survive again. I think we can all agree on that, right? Anyway, you guys, that's it for me in this video. Thank you so much again for all the support. If you're not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. It's the best way to keep up to date with me and any new videos that I am releasing. Otherwise, you guys, thank you guys so much. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.